first global case of the coronavirus being found in northern England, many people want to know more about this potentially fatal virus. The coronavirus is a large group of viruses that affect the respiratory system. Patients have presented with fever, coughs, and breathing difficulties. It causes pneumonia and sometimes kidney failure. The human coronavirus was identified in the mid-1960s, and cases have risen since then. Contrary to popular belief, the virus isn't linked to the popular lager brand. It is in fact named because of the crown-like projection on the surface of the virus. Coronaviruses are very fragile, as they only survive outside the body for around 24 hours. The viruses are also easily destroyed by household detergents and cleaning products. Despite this, the virus can be lethal, and out of the 10 reported cases, 5 have been fatal. As with other respiratory infections, the coronaviruses are spread through the air. When an infected person coughs or sneezes, tiny droplets containing the virus become airborne and can be inhaled by someone nearby. To avoid catching or spreading any viruses, make sure to follow the Catch It, Bin It, Kill It campaign.
An infectious disease specialist who has been actively participating in preventing and controlling the spread of the Wuhan coronavirus in China explained the symptoms and development of the disease during a recent interview with CCTV.
我们临床指呢，已经第1版、第2版测了第3版了。就是说，这个病毒目前初步的根据现在发病的情况，它这个感染以后，早期可以发烧、不舒服、有干咳那么一般呢，这个到加重是在第10天左右。这个规律呢，基本上清楚了。那么它的前危期呢，也基本上清楚。一般我们过去讲 SARS 的话，前危期是14天它也差不多在10天到14天左右。所以懂得了它的就感染以后先不发病，那这个时间段知道了，那我们就对有密切接触者可以医学观察和隔离。感染以后的病程也已经比较明确了，所以目前来讲还是轻重的病人比较多重度的相对比例还比较低，但是呢，它都是有一个演变的过程，所以我们要严防病人变重症、变危重症要加大这个抢救这个力度。
On how to distinguish the common cold from the pneumonia caused by the new coronavirus, Lee said it is better to have a test in a hospital.
目前的早期的症状呢是非常相似的有发烧有的干咳这有的呼吸道的症状发烧以后嘛人有乏力，甚至有的还有点消化道的症状，所以我们要鉴别的话，最重要的就是咽拭子取个样，做个病毒的检测。现在技术非常好了，就能报告你是甲流还是乙流就响应流感还是异流感还是这个新型冠状病毒这非常清楚。每个医院流感病毒都应该为检测，现在新型冠状病毒的试剂应该定点的医院也应该都有了，都能检测了。
Lee also stressed that China's lockdown of Wuhan and its surrounding areas are necessary to curb the spread of the coronavirus, and just in time when the outbreak had come to a critical moment.
So these are a broad family of viruses that are actually named after their microscopic appearance. Corona looks like a crown. And there are, again, dozens of these. There's a few of them that are known to infect humans that largely cause relatively mild upper respiratory disease or common cold. And then more recently, we've had outbreaks of coronaviruses that can cause severe lower respiratory tract disease or pneumonia. So the first of these that we became acquainted with, you might remember, your viewers might remember SARS. that also came out of China back in 2003. More recently, we've had MERS, which is known as the Mid-East Respiratory Syndrome virus, which is coming out of the Arabian Peninsula. So now this is the third kind of novel coronavirus that we're having experience with that can cause severe lower respiratory tract disease. These typically spread from person to person via large droplets, respiratory droplets. So when somebody coughs or sneezes, it can be transmissible that way.
There were reports that this started at a food market. It is not a foodborne illness, though. This is something that's spread just via the air.
Correct. So many of these coronaviruses have a natural reservoir in animals. And so we know that in certain instances they've been able to infect camels or cats or bats. And the original descriptions of this new coronavirus coming out of China to a food market where they had live animals that they would sell. So the hypothesis is that there may be an animal reservoir that has now transferred into humans.
So there has been at least one case here in the U.S., someone that had traveled to that area of China. What is your message to people here? I mean, how concerned do people need to be about this virus?
So maybe I'll turn to Dr. Lawler, who's our expert on global health security, and he might be appropriate to answer that question.
So I think right now the risk in the United States and in most countries outside of China is very low. The outbreak really seems to be concentrated in the city of Wuhan, which is in kind of central eastern China. And in the U.S., we should probably be much more worried about influenza and respiratory diseases that we know cause significant morbidity and mortality every year. So on an average year, 30,000 Americans die of influenza. So we've had one detected case of this new coronavirus in the U.S. So I think it's appropriate for folks to temper their alarm. But it is, I think, reason to be aware that we are vulnerable to emerging infections anywhere in the world. With modern transportation, you can be anywhere in the globe in 24 hours. And so, I think the good thing is it highlights that we've become much better at detecting, these types of events. Our surveillance is much better than it was even in 2003 with SARS. And I think the fact that just a couple of weeks into the outbreak, we have a much better idea of what the pathogen is. We have systems already in place that are doing surveillance and detection and tracking, and so I think we're well ahead of where we have been with previous outbreaks. But again, this is unfortunately something that's going to continue to happen. New and emerging diseases are not going to stop anytime soon.
Can you talk a little bit about, would Nebraska Medicine have any role, the biocontainment unit, in responding to this, particularly if it continues to grow?
Angela, why don't you take that as our director of the biocontainment unit?
Sure. So yes, we definitely in the Nebraska Biocontainment Unit follow this and any other outbreak going on in the world very closely. And I do feel like that in our role as a biocontainment unit and also as one of the leaders in the United States in biocontainment, that we should not only be monitoring this closely but also serving as an example for others as far as doing appropriate travel screening here at Nebraska Medicine, making sure that when people come to our emergency department or our clinics that we're asking that question, have you traveled somewhere outside the United States? Not necessarily just for this virus that we're discussing, but for other pathogens as well. There are other outbreaks going on in the world as well. But yes, in the biocontainment unit, I do feel like that we should serve in that leadership role and to provide that guidance for others in their infection control management of these type of pathogens.
You talked a little bit about the change in response to these kinds of illnesses as compared to SARS 15 years ago, I suppose. Can you expand on that a little bit and talk about what the global response looks like in terms of containing this type of outbreak and treating it if that's something that's occurring?
Sure. I think overall this response has been much quicker and much more open and transparent than what happened in 2003 with SARS. So SARS was going on and there were cases that were popping up in hospitals and transmission was occurring for months before anybody really became aware of it outside of the local endemic region. And then it took quite a while to identify what the virus was and to implement appropriate travel screening and precautions. And by that time, the virus had escaped and was in Hong Kong, was in Singapore, was in Vietnam, ended up in Canada. And so you really had a worldwide outbreak at that point. Hopefully, so far, we seem to have done a much better job of identifying cases and implementing the appropriate public health measures to prevent spread. As I mentioned, the Chinese government has actually been very transparent and open about sharing the status of the outbreak, and identified and notified partners in the World Health Organization very quickly. The WHO is apparently meeting to discuss whether this should be declared a public health emergency of international consequence. I think at this point, most experts predict that will not happen, that the WHO will be satisfied with the status of response right now, and the fact that this appears to be, so far, relatively confined, except for a few cases that have kind of gotten out on airplanes. And so I think overall it does demonstrate that the world has made significant progress in combating these types of emerging disease threats.
And if I could elaborate just a little bit on that, clearly here in the United States we're being very proactive. So travelers from Wuhan, China are actually being funneled into 5 airports in the U.S. now, where they are being screened for any kind of respiratory or febrile illness. If they were discovered, they would be observed carefully and quarantined. Similarly, they're being given information that if they arrive here and then become ill, that they should seek a medical attention, and obviously alert medical personnel that they've been potentially exposed in Wuhan. So we're very much ahead of the ball game as opposed to where we were years ago, and are being very proactive with this. Here at Nebraska Medicine, as Dr. Hewlett mentioned, we clearly have already put in travel screening for people coming into our clinics and emergency department. We have the biocontainment unit on alert if we needed them.
One question that we've heard on staff here is people locally have had children or friends or known people who have been diagnosed with coronavirus, and it's confusing to them. They hear the word and they think it's the same thing. Can you explain the differences there? Yeah,
so clearly the coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that cause everything from the common cold, which is what you're referring to more severe lower respiratory tract disease, which is what these newer novel coronaviruses are sometimes associated with. We're particularly concerned with these novel coronaviruses and other coronaviruses sometimes in very immunosuppressed hosts. And so sometimes they can cause more severe disease, even the more common coronaviruses, in our bone marrow transplant patients or somebody who is immunosuppressed, or the very young or the very old. So we do have a wealth of experience with coronaviruses in general, and are learning more about this new one as days go by.
The biocontainment unit is ready. I mean, would someone with a very severe case of this particular strain of the coronavirus potentially come to the biocontainment unit for treatment or quarantine?
There's a chance that could happen. We, as Dr. Brutt mentioned, we are travel screening, and if we did have a person who presented to our emergency department or to our clinics that had an appropriate travel history and also appropriate symptoms, then we would consider bringing them into the biocontainment unit, mainly for diagnosis and then appropriate monitoring and supportive care. We do serve as a leader both in our region and the United States. There's a chance that if there were a patient that were infected with this illness in our region as well, that we could care for them in the unit also. And we do stand ready for this and any other pathogen.
Last question I think I have is, I know that we don't want to be alarmist because the flu is a larger threat for people here in the U.S., but if people have travel plans to go to some of these locations where the disease has been detected, I mean, what are the symptoms or what should people be aware of? Is there any sort of message of what people should be looking out for?
So the CDC has issued a fairly low-level alert for people traveling to that specific part of China that they should be careful, avoid sick people, just some common sense sort of precautions. Again, the coronaviruses generally cause kind of a febrile flu-like illness, and so it could be easily confused with much more common viruses that we're seeing. And as Dr. Lawler mentioned, I think that it's important for viewers to keep this in perspective, that we currently have widely circulating a virus, influenza, that causes anywhere from 25,000 to 50,000 deaths per year in our country every year. And so we need to be, making sure that we're taking appropriate precautions to prevent the spread of those viruses while being on lookout for this novel coronavirus at the same time.
I have a question from a reporter online asking how, if we are currently working with the CDC and WHO and monitoring or preparing for the coronavirus, does the Global Center for Health Security play a role?
Sure. So the Global Center for Health Security is involved in long-standing programs to help train first responders and other healthcare workers in appropriate infection prevention and control. We work very closely with our biocontainment unit colleagues and also with folks here at the university and at the hospital who are part of the Ebola Treatment and Education Center, which is the main resource for training hospitals across the nation in appropriate infection prevention and control. And so, all of those efforts together really over years have done a significant amount to increase preparedness in hospitals to manage these types of highly dangerous pathogens. That's another advantage that we have over 2003 is that after Ebola and with the advent of NETEC and other efforts, we've done a much better job of preparing hospitals to manage patients with potentially highly infectious diseases, and that's a real resource that I think could be relied on and will significantly improve our ability to manage an outbreak beyond 1 or 2 patients if that's what occurs.
How is something like this different than an Ebola type situation where you have such high levels of travel as compared to not seeing that as much in Western Africa with Ebola?
Well, China is a very common travel destination, both for business travelers as well as for people going on vacation, and so we don't see quite as much travel to those areas affected by Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo, namely currently, as we do to China, which is a very common travel destination. So that is one difference about Ebola versus this outbreak is that there are a lot more travelers returning to the U.S. and to other places from China than from the affected area in the Congo.
The other thing I would point out is that the lethality of these diseases differ very markedly, with Ebola being associated with a much higher rate of fatality than the coronavirus infection. Currently, we have a handful of deaths due to coronavirus in China. It appears to be less transmissible and less severe, perhaps, than SARS or even MERS. So we have that to our advantage as well.
Is there a way to compare how transmissible this might be compared to the flu that we're experiencing, and how lethal it might be compared to flu? We've had several deaths in the area via flu already.
Correct, and that's why I think that it's so important for people to keep those things in perspective, that we're dealing with very minimal risk right now from this coronavirus, where we're dealing with a much higher level of risk from very common viruses that we are used to encountering each and every year.
Anyone have anything else? Okay, great. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Rafi, unang-una, anong nationality nito at saan galing ang naturang nagpositibo sa nCoV at saan-saan siya nakarating sa ating bansa?
O kabayan, isang Chinese ang kauna-unahang person under investigation na nagpositibo sa 2019 novel coronavirus dito sa Pilipinas. Ayon kay Health Secretary Francisco Duque, ay galing Wuhan, China itong 38 taong gulang na Chinese na nakapasok sa bansa bilang turista noong January 21. Inuubo kaya isinugod sa isang ospital ng gobyerno ang Chinese, at dahil patient under investigation o PUI, kinunan siya ng sample para ipasuri sa Australia. Nang lumabas ang resulta, agad itong inanunsyo ng Department of Health.
The DOH is confirming that a 38-year-old female Chinese patient under investigation, or PUI, is positive for the novel coronavirus. She is currently asymptomatic. So let me repeat. She is currently asymptomatic. The DOH, however, continues to guarantee the public that all necessary precautionary measures are being taken to halt the spread of the virus.
Tinutuntun na ng DOH ang mga nakasalamuhan ng turista pero hindi ito magiging madali. Ayon sa DOH, dumating ang pasyente sa bansa mula Wuhan via Hong Kong Enero 21. Dinala siya sa isang government hospital noong ding January 25.
We requested for the flight details, kung ano yung mga flight carriers na sinakyan ng pasyente at saan pumunta. And we are looking at the places where they'd been to in Cebu and in Dumaguete. Once we have seen or we have the list of these places, we do the contact tracing for the plane.
Sabi ni Avelino, kakausapin nila ang mga establishmentong pinuntahan ng pasyente at aabisuhan ang mga may-ari at mga empleyadong kanyang nakasalamuha. Isa sa ilalim din sila sa mandatory quarantine. Dahil kumpirmadong napasok na ang Pilipinas ng NCOV, may sinabi naman o may irerekomenda naman si Secretary Duque.
I will strongly recommend to the task force, the Emerging Infectious Disease Task Force, of whose members that I already enumerated, a temporary restriction of travelers from the entire Hubei province of China. But I believe that will still change. It could expand the number or increase the number of places depending on the assessment that is going to be done by the WHO.
Okay, umabot na sa 29 ang bilang ng mga persons under investigation o PUI sa Pilipinas, 18 ang nasa Metro Manila, 4 sa Central Visayas, 3 sa Western Visayas at 1 sa Mimaropa, Eastern Visayas, Northern Mindanao at Davao. 23 pa rin ang nasa ospital habang 5 na ang na-discharge pero masusi pa rin minomonitor ng DOH. Pinabulaan na naman ng San Lazaro Hospital na naka-lockdown ito dahil sa mga naka-admit na PUI.
There's no truth to that, hindi kami naka-lockdown. We're just observing strict prevention and control measures for our isolated areas. Siyempre, restricted yung area na yon.
Kabayan, sa buong mundo ay nasa 7,000 na ang tinatamaan nitong 2019 novel coronavirus at 170 na ang namamatay. Paglilinaw naman ng World Health Organization kanina, kabayan, walang katotohanan ang mga lumalabas sa ilang pahayagan na 4 na ang positibo sa 2019 nCoV dito sa bansa. Nananatili pa rin itong isa sa mga oras na ito, kabayan.
May latest ba sila, Rafi, tungkol doon sa natatanda mong namatay din Chinese? Na kung saan ay ginagawa pa rin ang confirmatory test. Meron ka bang latest ang DOH?
Kabayan, tinanong natin to kanina sa direktor ng San Lazaro Hospital, si Medical Director Edmundo Lopez. Pero hanggang ngayon ay inaantay pa rin nila ang confirmatory test nitong namatay. No? At matatandaan mo nga, ang sinabi nilang cause of death nito ay pneumonia. Pero sinabi rin nila na positibo ito sa HIV o yung Human Immunodeficiency Virus. Kaya hindi pa rin nila malaman talaga kung nCoV nga ang naging sanhi ng kanyang pagkamatay o komplikasyon naman dahil sa HIV, kabayan.
Paano daw, Rafi, ngayon susundan, ititrace ng mga otoridad natin ang nangyaring ito sa nag-positive sa nCoV? Paano ititrace ngayon ng DOH?
O kabayan, ang contact tracing ang kanilang gagawin. Una muna ay i-determine nila kung ano yung sinakyan na airline nito nga nagpositibo nga sa nCoV. Dahil nga sinabi ng Department of Health na nagpunta rin ito sa Cebu at Dumaguete. So bilang turista nga, marami itong pinuntahan ng mga lugar. Titingnan din nila yung establishmento kung sino yung mga nakasalamuhan niya, lalong-lalo na yung mga empleyado nito. Pagdating naman sa eroplano, kabayan, dahil nga sumakay ito ng eroplano, may ipapatupad daw ang Department of Health or may susundin ng Department of Health na 4 rule. Ito yung kukontakin at ititrace nila yung 4 na pasahero sa harapan, sa likod at sa magkabilang gilid ng pasyente. At kung makontak na nila ito, ay isasagawa na nila, i-recommend nila yung mandatory quarantine, kabayan.
You are one of the world's experts on feline leukemia virus. This is a really, really difficult disease with cats. This means you understand the intra-animal thing. Explain to us the intra-animal thing of this virus we have right now.
Absolutely. Well, viruses are really adapted to infect a particular kind of species. So we have human viruses, we have cat viruses, we have monkey viruses, and the virus sort of comes to an agreement with its animal host and usually doesn't want to kill its host because it wants to thrive and pass on the viruses to other species of the same species. However, the problem is that when a virus jumps from an animal to a human, it's suddenly in this strange new environment. And anything could happen. And usually the biggest outbreaks and diseases we have are in that situation.
Dr.
When
Rohn,
something jumps from an animal to a human.
Yeah, back to David Baltimore a few years ago, and just the idea of how viruses mutate. Are we dealing with a stable illness, or do you just presume over the weeks, over the months, this virus can mutate into forms either good or bad?
That's a good point. The virus is made out of RNA, not DNA, and that makes it inherently a little bit less stable than other viruses. So it definitely could mutate. And in fact, when viruses jump to animals, that's sometimes one of the first things that it does. It shuffles around to try to get its bearings, and it changes. So yes, it might be slightly less stable than other viruses, but early indications are that it's a bit more stable than something like influenza.
Doctor, what works in protecting yourself? I mean, there's a number of things put in place and basically blockading cities and stopping travel. But if you're a normal citizen looking at this, and a lot of people are worried about it, do you wear surgical masks? Do you wash your hands more? Is there anything that everyone can do to try and stop the spreading of this?
Well, the spread definitely appears to be through droplets, through sneezing, and obviously this also includes touching surfaces where people may have sneezed. So you want to stay away from sneezing people. If you're really paranoid, you want to stay off public transport, but I don't think, for example, in the UK, that's necessarily the case. Masks, there's sort of a mixed messaging on masks. Many of them are not effective. So really the best thing to do is to stay out of very crowded places where the virus is known to be circulating.
Right.
And definitely that hand sanitizer is a good idea.
Dr. Rohn, part of your act is a wonderful grasp of history. How does this stuff end? Whether it's, the plague years ago across Europe, how does a virus end? Is it the greater weather pattern, or is it something different?
Well, really, really nasty viruses like Ebola virus can just burn out. If you destroy the whole village, there's nowhere left to go. And a virus without a host is dead in the water. On the other hand, viruses sometimes come to an agreement with their new hosts and they evolve to be less virulent, and we learn to live with them. We hope we can come up with cures and vaccines. SARS is the best thing that we have to this, the best comparison that we can make. And SARS, we got it under control with public health measures. We didn't even need to deploy that amazing vaccine that we developed.